CSU students who filed for a COVID vaccine exemption have their private information leaked. University of Hawaii is using the gender unicorn to brainwash students into transgender ideology. And in our top story of the week, Oregon never ceases to disappoint, really topping the woke charts, this time by teaching white people that their skin color is basically a cancerous disease and a plague on the entire country. Lots of unifying going on over there at OSU. Finally, in our woke tweet of the week, we will discuss a tweet from former Obama-era Secretary of Education who decided it was totally appropriate to compare people who don't wear a face mask or get the vaccine to radical Islamist terrorists who murdered 13 fallen servicemen and women in Afghanistan. It, of course, is far from appropriate, and we'll point out the obvious as to why. I'm Addison Smith, and this is the Campus Countdown. In our number 3 story of the week, California State University at Chico had a bit of a data spill. Students who filed for vaccine exemption had their private information leaked. Campus Reform has the report. A spreadsheet containing the names and numbers of 130 students from California State University, Chico, was leaked onto the internet Monday. Several students were named in the leak, which revealed personal information included in their COVID-19 vaccine exemption form. Andrew Staples, the public relations manager at CSU, rushed to reassure students, telling the Sacramento Bee, "We are aware of the documents posted online and circulated among the media. We're investigating this incident while also taking a number of proactive steps to protect students' confidential information." Campus Reform spoke with Chico State College Republicans. The group said that they were deeply upset over the incident, adding that they expect a thorough investigation to be conducted. Sean Murphy, the university's media relations director, told Campus Reform, quote, "Chico State is following the CSU's policy by honoring the right for students to claim a religious exemption. The university continues to accept requests from students and employees for religious or medical exemptions for COVID-19 vaccine exemptions," Murphy added. Students should still know that Chico State supports their rights to hold their sincerely held religious beliefs. The Los Angeles Times reports that the university has opened an internal investigation into the incident. It's not clear if this leak was a mistake or not, but there absolutely should be an investigation into this. When private information is leaked, especially in the day and age that we live in with COVID, and when information leaked about a group of people who don't trust the vaccine, that's a pretty big deal. Because we see time and time again the contempt so many people have for those who don't want to be vaccinated, and we have an example of that later on in the show. Now we turn to Robert Schmad for our number 2 story of the week.
Thanks, Addison. In our number 2 story of the week, the University of Hawaii is going to be using the gender unicorn to teach students about trans ideology. Campus Reform Online has the report. Students attending the University of Hawaii at Manoa's housing orientation learned from the gender unicorn how to use their preferred restrooms. Further, the orientation required students to work through the presentation and take a quiz to prove they had read the content. The gender unicorn, a graphic produced by Trans Student Educational Resources, identifies 5 categories that contribute to gender: gender identity, gender expression, sex assigned at birth, physical attraction, and emotional attraction. Categories are shown as a sliding spectrum. All of these identities and more are protected at UH Manoa, the presentation states. Another slide tells students that they should use the restroom, changing room, or facility that corresponds to their gender identity. LGBTQ+ Center Director Cameron Miyamoto and UH Manoa spokesman Dan Mizal both referred Campus Reform to a system-wide University of Hawaii policy that ensures restrooms and facilities support a wide community of diverse students, faculty, staff, and visitors, inclusive of their gender identity and/or gender expression. In keeping with the university's policy of non-discrimination on the basis of gender identity and gender expression, all employees, students, and visitors have the right to use facilities that correspond with their gender identity and to be free from harassment or discrimination, the policy says. Now, it's pretty ridiculous that a university believes adults need to be taught what bathrooms they should be using by a gender unicorn. Students are being taught like they're babies. And this is not just confined to the University of Hawaii. A professor at Arizona State University has argued that parents should lose control of their children's medical care as it pertains to gender transitioning. So even if you don't have kids in college, you are not immune to this gender ideology. The gender unicorn has been used in K-12 schools in North Carolina. What we're seeing in college campuses is making its way into young kids' classrooms.
Thanks, Robert. In our top story of the week, the beloved by none state of Oregon is back to their higher ed woke shenanigans yet again. OSU recently hosted a seminar on confronting systemic whiteness. Campus Reform has the report. A recent event at Oregon State University taught faculty of the dangers of systemic whiteness in America. The seminar, titled Confronting Systemic Whiteness, was held by the university's College of Education and served the purpose of allowing faculty to, quote, engage in issues of whiteness and systemic racism in the institution as well as more broadly in the United States. I gotta say, there's a little irony calling it an issue of whiteness and then right after that talking about racism. Anyways, we'll go on. The seminar's stated learning objectives include understanding the various ways that systemic whiteness plagues the country. It describes this systemic whiteness as an all-encompassing force that impacts all individuals regardless of their intent. The objectives claim that, quote, anti-blackness permeates U.S. society and that it has had a substantial impact on the lives and outcomes of Black Americans. The OSU College of Education claims that the seminar was created in direct response to the Black Lives Matter movement and their increased prominence in the eyes of the public. Attendees were given Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility and watched Tim Wise's White Like Me as homework assignments, among many other works over the 5-day period. At the end of the seminar, the faculty were expected to create and organize small communities where they worked on anti-racist efforts together. I mean, the way that they talk about this is just bizarre. Notice the language the left uses to talk about white people. They talk as if we're a disease, an illness. To have whiteness is to have some sort of unfortunate condition. They're having a conversation about systemic racism while essentially talking about an entire race of people like they have a cancer because of the color of their skin. And for the left, the only way to atone for this as white people is if we commit every waking moment of our lives hating ourselves, pledging allegiance to BLM and other anti-racist propaganda, apologizing for our skin color, and pretty much wishing we had never been born. And maybe, just maybe, we can be worthy of existing. That is what the left preaches. This is their dogma, and I reject that entirely. Now let's get to our woke tweet of the week. Our woke tweet of the week comes courtesy of Arne, I don't really care what his name is, Arne Duncan, former education secretary under Barack Obama. He recently took to Twitter to let everyone know that, yeah, the Taliban might be bad, but you do realize there are some Americans who don't want to wear masks or get vaccinated, right? Here it is. Have you noticed how strikingly similar both the mindsets and actions between the suicide bombers at Kabul's airport and the anti-mask, anti-vax people are? They both blow themselves up, inflict harm on those around them, and are convinced that they're fighting for freedom. No, Arne, I don't understand that. I apologize. I don't see how radical terrorists who hate Americans and want to harm our citizens are the same people who don't want to get a vaccine against an illness. Before we break this down, I can't help but point out how obviously disgusting and shameful this is. 13 American families are mourning the murders of their loved ones at the hands of radical Islamist terrorists, and you're going to use that as a cheap hit on conservatives who don't want to be forced to get vaccinated or wear a mask? It's sickening stuff. And when you go and make this kind of comparison, likening conservatives to radical, murderous Islamic terrorists, it just shows how intellectually lazy, shallow, and incompetent you are, and just how ignorant you are about both. It's the same thing when the left makes Hitler comparisons to Trump. They're too lazy to actually make an intellectual case against Trump, so they just chalk him up to Hitler because their depth of the knowledge of history stops at buzzwords like fascist, Nazi, Hitler, etc. I also want to touch on his argument that the one thing anti-mask, anti-vaxxers, and terrorists have in common is that they're convinced they're fighting for freedom. While that may be the case for some anti-vaxxers or anti-maskers, he's not leaving room for prudential judgments. Plenty of young people recognize that the virus poses virtually no risk to them, and even if they get it, it's very, very mild for them, so they don't see the point in getting vaccinated or wearing a mask to protect themselves over a virus that their age is already their biggest defense against. Some women might have fertility concerns and are hesitant because of the lack of data on the safety of the vaccine as it relates to childbearing. Others might have some other medical complications or concerns. And yes, others object to it on the grounds that they shouldn't be forced to inject themselves with a chemical. Their body, their choice. Right, Arne? What are your thoughts on that? That will conclude this week's episode of the Campus Countdown. Thank you for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment. And if you're not following us already, make sure you are at Campus Reform on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.